Welcome back to another episode. Today we're going to look at design thinking and how it can help us become better writers. And I'll read a quote to you from the MIT's Sloan School of Management. And at the very top of the article on design thinking, it says, coming up with an idea is easy. Coming up with the right one takes work. With design thinking, throwing out what you think you know and starting from scratch opens up all kinds of possibilities. What a great way to make us better writers. Throwing out what we know and starting from scratch to build a better product. In this case, our memos or reports, our letters, etc., and the ideas and thoughts that go into them. So let's dive in and see what design thinking is and how it might help us. Hello, Professor Luke Buckley back with us for another episode, and this time we're going to be thinking about design thinking. Well, what is design thinking? Let's dive in and see what we can find out. It is essentially an iterative process designed to allow us to do a few things, not only as writers, but maybe as designers, as engineers, as teachers, as parents, what have you. It's been around since the 1960s as a concept, but first of all, it allows us to understand our users. Second, the process challenges assumptions about our products that we're using or designing. And thirdly, it lets us redefine some of the problems that we are trying to tackle. It helps designers attempt to come up with alternatives in a strategy and solution format that we might not immediately think about with our current understanding of what's going on. It is definitely a core part of our user-centered design philosophy, and it helps us to do a few things. One, it allows us to observe and develop an empathy with our audience and target users. We are allowed to question the problems and assumptions and implications that we think about, and it allows us to overall tackle ill-defined or unknown problems and reframe those problems in a human-centric way. It allows us to create new ideas in a brainstorming process, and then it allows us to prototype and experiment with those ideas that we create. Okay? Well, let's look at some of the phases that it has. The first phase in the design thinking process is empathize. We must empathize with our users. We must walk a mile in their shoes, so to speak. Okay, and we will quickly through the phases here, and then we'll unpack them in more detail in the next slide. So after we empathize, we must define what the problem is and start thinking about how we're going to solve that problem with a solution. After we've done that, then we ideate. We make some ideas up about how we might make our solution real, and then we build prototypes. And after we have a prototype, we test it. Okay, well, let's unpack each of these in a little bit more detail. Okay, so we have 5 phases: empathize with our users, define our users' needs, ideate, and that's where we challenge those assumptions. We come up with some innovative solutions. We prototype, we start to create those solutions, and then we test it to see how well we did. Okay, first, empathize. According to the Oxford English Dictionary, this is where we understand and share the feelings of another person or persons or people group or culture or what have you. Okay, so in empathy, we're not trying to solve our own problems. We're trying to solve the problems of our users. We need to step into the mindset of the users, and this is true no matter what product you are designing. You know, you might be designing in my class a memo or a report, or if you're an engineer going forward, you might be designing a skyscraper or a suspension bridge. All of these principles apply as we're going. Okay? You can follow a 3-step process to develop empathy. What is the 3 steps? Firstly, you observe your users. You see what they're doing in an ethnographic sense. You see them in their homes, in their work, in their schools, and then you write things down. You capture quotes that they say. You write down their behaviors. You make notes to yourself of how they would interact with the solution you're eventually going to bring forward. It must be reflective of the true experience. And make sure to watch for clues that will give you an inside track to their thoughts and feelings. Okay? So we observe, And then we engage, we interact with them, we interview them in both scheduled and non-scheduled scenarios. We want to get a better idea of what their true thoughts are, and that will lead us into deeper insights as to their beliefs and values when they might come to interact with our product. After we've engaged, we're going to immerse ourselves in their experience. And this is where I say the old saying, walk a mile in their shoes. You need to find ways to be authentic and understand their environment firsthand. If you're going to design something for them, say you're designing what might we design? A radio that only can be used by a left-handed person, but the entire house is full of right-handed people. We didn't do a very good job of figuring out who they were, engaging with them, and immersing them in the process. And well, that leads us to the next step. We must define what the problem is. See, I leave my bloopers in. Okay? In this phase, we're going to take those findings and observations we just discovered in the empathy phase, and we're going to create a reframed point of view and define the needs and insights for our product. And then we're going to scope a meaningful challenge to ourselves. Only after you understand this challenge, framed against your user's point of view and not yours, can you define the problem. Okay, the characteristics of your point of view. Let's take a look. 1, you're going to persevere or preserve your emotions and the individual that you're designing for. Okay, so they have an emotional response to this. You're going to define a language and make sure it's strong language so you understand what you're building going forward. If you don't understand your problem, you can't define a solution for it. Use wording that makes sense. Okay? If you're going to interact with yourself and a group of people to make a solution, make sure that you use a vocabulary that everybody understands, and it should have a very strong insight. If you have truly taken time to observe and immerse yourself in their experience, you understand your client. You'll be able to take these things and roll them forward and create lots of possibilities to solve the problem. After we've defined our problem, the next thing is to ideate. It's a process called ideation. This is where we design or we generate radical design alternatives from your understanding of not only your problem statement, but also here's where we start to make solutions. This phase is characterized by a wide variety in quantity and diversity of possible ideas. And from here you will launch into the next phase and develop prototypes. But let's take a look at what ideation really means to us. We want to harness all of the collective perspectives and strengths of your team. Make sure you have a wide variety of skills and abilities in people that are working with you to develop this solution. Then you're going to step beyond the obvious solutions and drive innovation, right? If everybody made a ballpoint pen the same way, we wouldn't need multiple companies to do it. Okay? You got some where you pull the cap off, some where you twist it, some where you click the end, some where you slide the thing up and down. We have many different versions of a ballpoint pen, and that's because somebody sat down and drove innovation. Same for cars, or buildings, or doors. How many different door handles have you encountered in your life? Okay? Thirdly, we want to uncover those unexpected areas of exploration. We want to go beyond or outside of the box in our thinking. Okay? And this will help us create a fluency and flexibility in both volume and variety in your innovation options. And now once we have this ideation phase done, we've ideated, we've sat down, we've thought of all these things, we're going to start to build a prototype. Woohoo! Now we get to do something. Now once we have our prototype phase in effect, you'll start to build something using the ideas that we've just generated in that last phase. And you can do this by slapping Post-it notes up on the wall. Or you can have your group of innovators stand around and each model out a part of the process. Or you can really build a physical model of the thing you're trying to design. If you're building a website, you might sit down and do a wireframe of it. If you're coming up with a new Lego design, you might get the whole box of Legos out and start putting them together and see what they turn out to be. The level of success you encounter in this phase is directly related to the experience and the interaction generated amongst your group. So what we're trying to do with this prototyping phase is, one, we should have a gaining of empathy. This will allow us to develop a deeper understanding still of our users connected with the design space, the space in which we are building our product. Secondly, we are going to drive, again, exploration. You should come up in the prototyping phase with multiple concepts, and this will allow you to test them at the same time. Maybe like an A-B test or ABC test, ABCDE. We got several things that might do the same with slightly different variations, and that allows us to build a better prototype. Next, obviously, testing. This is an iterative refining of your solution. Okay? We had our problem, we're trying to solve the problem, but we might not be able to do it with one shot. And then, obviously, innovation and inspiration. We're going to showcase your ideas and visions, moving on to the next phase. And that's where we test it. The ultimate way to collect feedback from your users, refine your solutions, and continue to learn more is by testing. And what we'll do in this class and many others is a usability test. This is where we bring the user in direct contact with your prototype and we ask them to use it and we watch what they do. Okay? All testing should be performed interactively and iteratively, and as a guiding principle, prototype it as if you know you are right in your guess on the solution, but we test it as if you know you're wrong. And this is amazing. As many times as I've done usability tests, you think you have it, you set it down in front of 20 different people, and you're going to get 20 different versions of a test in comments and thoughts and interactions. Maybe half the people can't figure out what to do with it. But that's okay. That's why this is iterative, right? Testing as an authentic experience will let you, first of all, learn more about your users. You're going to observe them in the environment, and you might even gain more empathy. Okay? Some things you did not think about. This engagement will lead to more insight. Then you can refine those prototypes and solutions, and then that can drive innovation, but it can also take you back to the drawing board and say, we didn't get it right at all. And then we can refine our point of view. You might find that you got the wrong solution and framed the problem entirely incorrectly, so you have to go back to step one and start all over again, but that's fine. That's all part of the parcel here. Okay? So let's consider an example. Here in this picture, you probably can immediately find something that is off. The truck tried to drive under this bridge, which had a 12-foot clearance, and it was taller than 12 feet. The driver got stuck, created just a mess. Traffic snarled, emergency responders came out, and they tried to figure out a solution. Well, oddly enough, the solution came after nothing would work. Tried to pull it. You can see it's a mess. The story goes, a young boy walked by, looked at it, and said, well, what would happen if you let the air out of the tires? Wouldn't it go down? Well, lo and behold, they did that, and the truck lowered enough to drive it off, and there was little damage done to the tires, but obviously the trailer's a mess, and there was no damage done to the bridge. And so this is an idea of design thinking. The boy walked by, assessed the situation with a simple question, asked, well, why don't you just let the air out of the tires? Okay? Thinking out of the box. The adults weren't getting there. All right, the process that we've just discussed in design thinking does not have to be linear. Okay? We can see that illustrated here. This graphic came from the Interaction Design Foundation, and there's our 5 steps, and you can see where it hops around. We can go from empathize to define, or we can get to testing, and we can, figure out that the testing didn't work well, go back to ideate, and then step through the process again and bounce around until we get a solution that works well for us. Okay? So that's a brief overview of design thinking. Now here's some references. You can learn more by digging into our books. You can Google it. Design thinking is popular. Like I say, it's been around since the 1960s as a concept, and more people have built upon it, as have many companies. They've bought into the idea of it. Okay? And so this is the end, or is it? Now, driving through Yellowstone National Park, you might encounter a design thinking problem. How do I manage to get out of here without these buffalo slamming into my car? So this is the end of this short presentation. Stay tuned for some closing comments. Okay, that was interesting. We learned a 5-step process for design thinking. We must first empathize with our users. Then we roll that data together. We define our problem and reframe our point of view. Thirdly, we start the ideation process. Fourth, we build a prototype. And fifth, we test it. Interestingly enough, I was really kind of curious to find out how they got that truck out from underneath the bridge until the boy walked by and said, "Hey, why don't you just let the air out of the tires? It'll go down and you can pull it out." So, interesting concept, design thinking. Put it in your toolbox, and we will move on and see what the next episodes have for us. This is Professor B. Stay tuned until next time.